Unit 3, Period 3 begins with the Constitution. From 1776 to 1783, the Revolutionary War was fought. In 1781, the Second Continental Congress wrote the first framework of government. The first Constitution of America was called the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation survived until Shays' Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts demonstrated the weakness of the Articles of Confederation because the national government did not have an army to put it down. So in 1787, delegates met in Philadelphia to revise the Articles of Confederation. Once they got there, they realized that the articles were unsavable. And so they began to write a new form of government called the U.S. Constitution, in which I'm showing you an actual copy of the U.S. Constitution found in Washington, D.C. at the National Archives. The Constitutional Convention of 55 men had men there who supported the idea of a stronger national government. They became known as Federalists, and men there who questioned the power of the new national government called anti-federalist. And these men wanted to protect the powers of state governments. Just for purposes of knowledge, the man standing here above the mouse is George Washington. Here is another notable delegate, James Madison, taking notes. Here is Benjamin Franklin. Notice his prominence among the men. He's sitting in a chair right at the front. And then here in his ear, attempting to influence him, is Alexander Hamilton. And as you look around the room, you can see men who are positive about what's going on. And then you also see men who don't look so happy about what's going on. The group that supported the ratification of the Constitution became known as the Federalists. They wanted a stronger national government. To ensure that this new Constitution that they wrote in Philadelphia would survive, these three of these men, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Jay, wrote 85 persuasive essays that were published in newspapers in all 13 colonies. These Federalist Papers, as they became known, were written to ensure that after the Constitution was written and ratified by the delegates at the convention, that when it went to the 13 states, that it would get passed. Alexander Hamilton played an influential role in getting New York to ratify the U.S. Constitution, and James Madison played an influential role in the state of Virginia to get the Constitution ratified. The subjects of their 85 Federalist Papers that they wrote was in multiple essays, the subject of federalism came up, and that the states needed to ratify the Constitution because the national government would not hold all the power. That the form of government would hold that power would be shared between the national and state governments, and that a Republican form of government, one of representative democracy, is best. The second argument was one about factions, and that factions are defined as a number of citizens amounting to a minority or a majority of the whole who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion, of interest, but yet these interests, this passion is adverse to the rights of other citizens or that of the community. And that's how I define the term, is that a faction is a group whose interests are contrary to that of the community. And the argument is that, like during the French Revolution, where you've got a group of people who eventually kill the king and take over the country, that's not going to happen in America because factions are not going to rule our country. Now, I will say that factions do have a say-so in our country because we are a democracy. but they don't control the parts of our country. The third argument is checks and balances. And the argument behind checks and balances is, again, that no one branch of government is going to become too powerful. In Federalist number 51 by James Madison, he says, in framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. So using the example of myself as a teacher, there are certain responsibilities that I have in the classroom, but I cannot abuse those responsibilities. I cannot take advantage of students. And so therefore there are checks on my power as the teacher in the classroom. And then last but not least, the power of the executive branch. And again, there were multiple essays written about this. The example that I have comes from Federalist number 70 by Alexander Hamilton, and that is that a singular president would better be suited to wield the full potential of his power in a quick and efficient way without falling into endless squabbling and dispute with other executives with the same power. So the argument is that if we elect a president of the United States, yes, that's going to put a lot of power in the hands of one individual, but that person will be able to make quicker decisions than a large group of executives or a congressional branch. Of course, there were people who opposed this idea of the passage of the Constitution, and they were known as the Anti-Federalists. They felt like the national government under the Constitution was going to become too strong. So they demanded that James Madison include later a Bill of Rights in order for them to ratify the Constitution. The Bill of Rights were the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, and they protect, and listen to this, they protect both individual and states' rights. They limit the power of the national government. A few examples are citizens have a right to bear arms. Citizens have a right to freedom of speech. Freedom not to incriminate yourself in your testimony. You have a right to peacefully assemble. But with that, states also gain rights, and one of those were that any responsibilities not listed in the Constitution specifically granted to the national government were reserved to the states. So that's the reason why your state law books are so big compared to the laws of the national government. This concludes Period 3, Unit 3, Section 7, the major arguments of the ratification of the Constitution.